2 o'clock. We're going to get started in just a minute while everybody joins us. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Universal Design in Mental Health in Individuals with Developmental Disabilities. This is also session 4 of the 2021 Mental Health Summit presented by the Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center and the Association of University Centers on Disabilities Mental Health Special Interest Group. Our presenters today are Dr. Elaine Eisenbaum, Patti Singleton, and Jason Jones, who are all from the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. My name is Kristen Dahl, and on behalf of MHDD, I would like to thank you for taking the time to be here today. Please visit our social media and website, mhddcenter.org, for resources related to mental health and developmental disabilities. If you are joining us on Zoom, the controls are located at the bottom bar of your Zoom window. Please use the chat box if you have comments or technical issues, and we will do our best to assist you. Please use the Q&A to submit questions for our presenters. We will read your questions as time allows throughout the presentation or during the optional Q&A time from 3 o'clock to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There is a hand-raising feature you can use if you need assistance from the MHDD team. Other than those presenting the webinar, everyone is muted and camera access is turned off. This webinar is being live captioned. You can turn on captions in the Zoom window by clicking the CC button on the menu and selecting Show Subtitles. You can also change the size of the caption text by selecting Subtitle Settings. ASL interpreting services are being provided by Central Kentucky Interpreter Referral. The webinar is also being broadcast live on YouTube. If you are joining us on YouTube, please add your comments and questions to the live chat on the right-hand side of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the MHDD YouTube channel and the MHDD website. We will be sending out an email following the webinar with an evaluation. We ask you to complete the evaluation so we can improve future webinars. The email will also include instructions on how to receive continuing education credits. Once again, thank you for being here today. I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to talk with you today. First order of business, if we can go to the next slide about materials.
All right, thanks. And we do have a shared box online. If you go to bit.ly/UD_therapy, you can access handouts. There are other resources, including today's slides. And so you can go to this website to download all of today's materials.
And hi, I'm Elaine Eisenbaum. I am a member of the Human Development Institute team, and my background is in social work, and also I've been in the disability field about 15 years or so.
And my name is Patti Singleton, also at the Human Development Institute, and I have a technological curiosity that has kind of led me into universal design and accessibility.
And I'm Jason Jones. I also work with the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. I've been there for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was with the State Office of Vocational Rehabilitation for about the 15 or 16 years before that. I have a disability myself, and I maneuver the world and look for things that are accessible and universally designed. And we'll find out those are not necessarily the same thing.
So before we get started, we do have a little poll for you I'm going to launch right now just to learn a little bit more about you and who's on the webinar. So the poll asks, what are your professional roles? And if you wouldn't mind filling that in, and we can get a sense of who our audience is. And thank you to everyone kind of filling in also on the chat. It's nice to see such diversity here among the jobs we have. And it looks like the majority of folks are a counselor, social worker, or other mental health professional, and a lot of program administrators, but we do have some students and other folks on here. So thank you for sharing that. So just to tell you a little about who we are, this project we're working on is the Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center. We're funded by a grant from the Administration for Community Living, and it's a partnership between University of Kentucky, Utah State University, and University of Alaska. And our goal is to provide information, resources, and training to promote quality mental health care for people with developmental disabilities. We do have a number of training modules available that are free. If you go to our website, mhddcenter.org, we have a number of training modules available. Some are geared towards clinicians and other mental health providers about serving clients with developmental disabilities. Others are geared towards individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities themselves, family members, direct support to learn more about mental health. And all of these are open to anyone. So even though they're categorized, anyone can look at any of our modules for free. And we try to keep these plain language and easy to read. So just to get started, we know that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are an underserved population in the field of mental health. They have at least similar or higher rates of mental health conditions, but they're not getting the services. So we're going to talk about that today and how we can address that. Historically, mental health conditions have been underdiagnosed in people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they've been falsely attributed to disability-related behaviors. That's a concept known as diagnostic overshadowing. It wasn't really until the 1980s that people even thought about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as having mental health diagnoses. So obviously, we weren't very good in this field about addressing that. We've obviously tried to be a lot better, but we still have ways that we can go to continue to fix our system. So one of the reasons that mental health conditions have been overlooked and underdiagnosed, and one of the reasons that people aren't getting the services they need is that mental health professionals report not feeling confidence in serving this population. They're not reporting getting the right training in school. They're not reporting just feeling prepared. And so we're hoping to address that today to give you a little bit more of a framework to support your confidence in serving the population. So this presentation will talk about a universal design framework for clinical practice. Universal design is an approach to therapy that can enhance your ability to serve clients with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Universal design is usually talked about in reference to classroom learning, physical environment, rehabilitation, but it also applies to clinical practice, and it can be used as an approach to working with all clients.
So let's start by defining what we mean by universal design. Universal design is a human-centered approach that aims to maximize access to environments and services. Coined by Ron Mace at North Carolina State University in the 1980s, the idea of universal design has evolved, and its application across settings and specializations continues to expand. Mace's original 1985 definition continues to be widely used and describes the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Other definitions of universal design have evolved as they relate to its applications. For example, Chisholm and May define UD from a web application perspective. Designing for everyone will help to create content that more people can use in more situations. Steinfeld and Maisel provide an expanded and more comprehensive definition. Universal design is a process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. The 7 principles of universal design relate to the usability and adaptability of a product or service and speak to applicability, equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance of error, low physical effort, and appropriate size and space. Ultimately, deploying universal design strategies at the outset increases the likelihood that a broad array of people will benefit. Social workers who include universal design in therapy may eliminate the need to make individual modifications later.
So if we're going to talk about, I alluded to this a little bit before, if we're going to talk about universal design, a lot of times what we start to think about is making things accessible. And not just in the physical world, but in the online world is becoming a huge push now as well to make sure that things are usable for everybody. So you'll hear terms like accessible design, accessibility, usable design, and universal design sort of grouped all together. And all are sort of approaches to design that can result in products that are easier for everyone to use, not just people with disabilities, but including people with disabilities. Universal, as we know, means everyone. So as a question in the chat, if everybody could, tell me what you think the difference in accessibility and universal design are. Tell me some of the differences that you think. So universal design is applied to everyone. Okay. Anybody else? What do you think the difference in accessibility and universal design is? Specifically for people with disabilities, okay. UD could be more inclusive. Accessibility is targeted individually, people with disabilities. Okay. Accessibility is like equality, but universal design is equality approach to environments and products. Okay. Man, you guys are good. I can't read that fast. You're way out passing my ability to spit it back out. But I feel like there's a pretty good understanding with this group that what the difference is. And of course, accessible design is a design process which usually meets the needs of people with disabilities, right? Where they are specifically considered, all right? But this is always a lot easier to explain on the physical access of things, because we can look at a ramp and we can know that that could be used by someone with a disability or someone who doesn't, right? It's kind of got an equal footing. But if you think of something like, if you've been to a place that has a lift that it's installed on the outside of the building, you're not going to think of that as universal design. I don't think you're going to think of a group of 10, 12 people standing in line waiting to get on a little lift that's going to raise them up 4 steps, like someone with a disability would need. So that would be one place where you would see a much broader or a much more focused, definition of what accessibility is versus universal design. Not too long ago, we had a group of builders come into our own home. And one of the things I was very proud of is a lot of the accessibility features that were built into the house have become super universally designed for our family. For instance, we have a ramp in our garage that is a long, inch to a foot ramp that everyone uses all the time to access the main door to our home. We use it for everything. We bring furniture in and out that door. We bring groceries in and out that door. We use it as equally. Everybody in the house uses it as equally as I do, and it gives everybody a little bit. It's a lot easier carrying heavy things up a ramp because you can push them. You can't push things up a step, right? So over the years with the kids, and I have 2 young sons, or 2. Oh gosh, they're not as young as they used to be. 13 and 10. But when they were in strollers and stuff, that was even an easier thing. And the world is recognizing this as a way of reaching out to more customers and a way of being more inclusive. And it's something that we all need to take into consideration in design of not just the physical environment, but also environments and ways that we approach programming, in the way we approach therapies, and in the way that we approach online access.
Universal design for learning emerged from the application of Mace's original universal design vision, applying the concept to an educational framework. UDL is a set of proactive principles for optimizing learning for all learners, including those with disabilities. This includes providing multiple means of engagement, representation, and action expression of content. enabling learners to interact with and show mastery of information in a variety of ways. UDL has become an increasingly popular concept and is included as an instructional strategy in the U.S. Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015 and Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act of 2018.
So we talked about this a little bit before, but who does universal design actually benefit? Okay, and the easiest answer is, what is essential for some is almost always good for all, right? I mean, the idea that everyone can benefit from a single thing. When we talk about entering a building, for instance, if you are a person that has to go in a different door than everyone else, there's some marginalization involved there, right? You have 50 people walking up to a door where there's 20 steps and one person has to go in the back door while everybody else goes in the front door, right? Whereas we could all go in the front door at the same time, the person with a disability feels like they are included like everyone else, right? So we're not marginalizing people or leaving them out of the full enjoyment and a good quality of life by saying you need to do things differently in order to have the same result and an easier result than people who do not have a disability do. Okay, and next slide. So this is a great example of it. I love this cartoon. It's I hope you can read it, but if you can't, it's it's basically a guy shoveling the steps and the person in the wheelchair saying, can you shovel the ramp? And he's like, well, there's more people that need to go up the steps. So let me shovel the steps first and then I'll shovel the ramp for you. And it's a good example because, of course, in our minds, that doesn't make sense, right? If you shovel the ramp first, every single person standing there waiting on the ramp is allowed to go at the same time, right? And then you honestly don't even really have to clear the steps, okay? Because you've created an access that is accessible, you've created a ramp that is accessible to everyone, okay? So when you think of things like social justice, money, law, productivity, professional, ethical obligations, right? To serve all populations, you may eliminate the need to make individual modifications later. It is something that we talk about with builders over and over and over. Retrofitting is the original cost plus, whereas design, universal design, is the original cost period. Okay, there's not a plus there because you do not have to go back in after you build something specifically, and we've seen this a lot in residential building, where people in their 50s and 60s build a home with 5-6 steps to every access in their house. Okay, and what do we know about an aging population? Those steps get more difficult, right? I mean, significantly difficult, more difficult as we age. Why are you building a house in your 60s with no accessible entrance? You're not trying to exclude people, but eventually you may end up excluding yourself, right? So universal design is so important in those situations. Build it in to your design accessibility. It makes it usable for everyone, and you save yourself money. One thing I've learned dealing with businesses and builders and stuff over the years, you got to talk the language. The language is, right? It can be cheaper, all right? It can help you increase your customer base. It can make people feel like they're more home when they're doing something with your business. This is so simple. It's so easy when you think about the idea that building, right, is easier than adding on. Good. And this applies again to everything from your therapies onto your online presence, all those kinds of things. Universal design is important.
So when we're talking about universal design and therapy today, our recommendations are based on the Universal Design for Learning framework. And that's based on CAST, CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technologies, has a Universal Design for Learning framework that was shown before, where the principles are multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And so for this to apply to clinical practice, we think about it as there needs to be a variety of means for engaging our clients in the therapeutic process, a variety of ways of presenting information while you're in the therapeutic process, and a variety of ways available for clients to effectively express themselves. So we're going to start with the first principle, multiple means of engagement. And so as clinicians, we're going to consider the ways to best engage our clients in therapy. And we already do this. We already individualize for clients. So this is really a part of what we already do. Clearly, we don't want our clients running away from boredom, lack of interest, thinking it doesn't apply to them. So with the Universal Design for Learning guidelines applied to clinical practice, the three guiding principles here are recruiting interest in therapy, sustaining effort and persistence, and self-regulation. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
So historically, people who with IDD and other marginalized populations have been denied self-determination, and their interests and goals were not respected, okay? So until today, people with IDD are often not given a choice in when or even how long they see a clinician or who they even see, okay, which is very unfortunate. So in many cases, a family member or staff person may have their own goals in mind for therapy. However, therapy goals must center around the client. We don't take this into consideration enough in society as a whole, okay? Especially when you're dealing with children or with aging adults that are still have parents who are their guardians, is that sometimes you have to get out of the way in order to be able to obtain the result that you want for your child or for the person that you are in charge of. And we don't ask the client enough. It was one thing that I really liked at OVR, and something that that the Human Development Institute does so well, is that we include people that our decisions are ultimately going to affect. Okay, so if you have a situation where you're sitting around and the person who is being talked about and not being talked to, then you have an issue, right? So even in situations where communication, where there's a barrier there, and we'll talk in a few minutes about that, there are ways to accommodate that situation in order to make it more easy for you to reach that client and for ultimately to obtain a result that includes the client's input in the first place.
So with the client-centered goals, what we can do as mental health clinicians is, obviously we help clients identify and understand why they're in therapy and what their goals are, right? We can use SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely, right? This is what we do. But sometimes clients may come in and they're not the ones who initiated therapy. Someone else thought they should see a therapist, or they didn't get to choose to see you, as Jason said, that they weren't a part of the decision making. And that needs to change right when they come in the door. They need to be the center. It's their goals that need to be listened to in order for this to be effective. And I know some of you may be thinking, well, yeah, we do that. But again, to repeat Jason, historically, this has not been the case. People have not necessarily been given the right to choose their own goals, and other people have been listened to. So we need to change that. And of course, one way to do that is to explain more about what therapy is and the intent of these goals. And we can ask clarifying questions, and we can utilize, techniques to help people to draw out their goals. So for example, like using solution-focused brief therapy techniques, like asking a miracle question to learn more about what they envision the future to be. So, imagine you went to bed tonight, and when you woke up tomorrow, the world or the job or your home looked like what you wanted it to be. It was everything you imagined, and it's perfectly what you want. How would your life be different, and what would that look like, right? So you can get to know what they're thinking and what they're struggling with and what they want to change.
So it's really important that we foster collaboration and community, right? So the more people that are involved and the more people that know the situation can help it evolve into a successful outcome. So when we're talking about fostering collaboration community, it helps to sustain effort and persistence, right? So we got to be very persistent in what we're doing. And we've seen this a lot over the last 17 to 18 months, because COVID-19 has really highlighted the need for connection and community for optimal mental health. We see higher incidence of drug overdose. We see higher incidence of alcoholism. We see higher incidence of institutionalization, just from the idea that people aren't able to connect. They're not able to see, to interact with their support systems and their communities. I work on a grant called Retained, where we help people who have obtained an injury get back to work. And one thing that I work on the peer mentoring side, I see every day when I talk to these people, they have this feeling of I'm by myself, right? Because the world has kind of went back to work in some ways. And since you're afraid in a lot of situations, because they're battling health issues as well, to access the community outside of work, then they find themselves being really alone. So, and what happens is, I think that we when we don't understand a disability and we're afraid to sort of tackle it head on, it creates some anxiety, which keeps us from interacting, which keeps us from including other people, which of course obviously leads to isolation in the end for the person. And we know, right, as a society, isolation is not healthy. It's very, even when someone chooses to isolate themselves, usually that is based on the idea that they don't want to be around other people, and ultimately that's not healthy as well. So when you think about, so while we know that social inclusion and a sense of community can kind of combat that loneliness and contribute to other positive outcomes, when you think about people with IDD are especially vulnerable to loneliness and isolation, and usually face a lot of obstacles to things like social inclusion, community integration, including discrimination, and just plain stigma, right? So to combat this, social workers can utilize group therapy or emphasize the importance of collaboration with trusted, that's a key word, family members, friends and others, sort of to work towards identified goals. And also social workers can provide things like information or referral sources to help their clients access those supports that are available in the community. Some ideas are like libraries, clubs, churches, other public spaces that promote community inclusion to the fullest.
Great. And, I wanted to say something about a comment I saw in the chat. Someone said there are not enough therapists or psychiatrists who are willing to serve people with ID. And we agree. And that's why, we want people here on this webinar who are not currently serving people to feel more comfortable. And you'll hear me say a lot, which I'm going to say about this next slide, that you're already doing this. These are things you're already doing that are already in your toolbox. And so really the things you need to serve people effectively with intellectual and developmental disabilities are things that you do know how to do already. So the next piece is, for clients to be really engaged in therapy, they need effective self-regulation, self-assessment, and reflection skills. And this is something we already work with all clients on, and we support them on these things. So for example, self-regulation skills, you can help your clients regulate their emotional responses through things like mindfulness and coaching some of those activities if they need support there. You can also, for self-assessment and reflection, a lot of people need support with this. Again, this is for everyone. Explicit instructions, modeling, tools like smartphone apps and reminders for self-assessment and reflection, checklists, charts. This can help people learn to regulate their emotional responses by being reminded and drawing their attention to it, or it can help them support and track progress and maintain motivation. So there are a lot of different tools that we can provide here. And in terms of minimizing distractions, I'll ask a question of you guys for you to put in chat. What are some of the ways that you already minimize distractions in a therapeutic environment? I'll give you a chance to respond here. Meet in privacy. Not having your mobile phone out. Closed door, only one person talking, turn off sounds, white noise, dim or softer lighting, reduce background noise. I'm seeing a lot, headphones, structured environment. Okay, there's more than I can keep up with, but thank you for sharing all these. And yes, many of the things that you're saying right here. Thinking about your therapeutic environment ahead of time to reduce sensory overload will support all your clients. Things like lowering the noise level, like many of you mentioned, or playing calming music or white noise. And you can ask clients, if they have this particular type of music they would like to listen to or not, right? That would be supportive of them. Choosing neutral paint and design colors, avoiding bright lights, flickering lights, humming fluorescent lights, don't have any of these. Minimizing the clutter and avoiding strong scents like strongly scented candles, air fresheners, perfumes. And I see lots of great ideas here on chat too. So I hope you're able to, maybe we can record these chat answers for you guys. So there's many ways to think about minimizing distractions ahead of time to make it more universally designed. And then I would also encourage you to speak with your clients and ask them if there's anything else you can do. So we just talked through multiple means of engagement, and I'm going to ask here if you want to put into the chat so we can learn from you. What is one way you use multiple means of engagement? And just to review, we talked about ensuring client is seen as the expert and they're in charge, ensuring client-centered goals, fostering collaboration and community, techniques to assist with self-regulation, self-assessment and reflection, and minimizing distractions. So if you would just take a minute here and share any things that you do in this area so that clients have a variety of ways to engage. Board games to make connections, I see someone putting. Multisensory assessment, alternate seating. Video and phone and face-to-face, so having different options. Using verbal and visual strategies. Implementing a reward system. So there's many different things people are using here. Giving time for individuals to answer. Drawing, texting clients. Okay, I'm gonna let, we'll save that chat and we'll just go on to the next one.
So it's also important, especially in the therapy setting, to provide multiple means of representation. What that means is it involves providing the client with various ways and materials to understand information during the therapeutic process. Do not look past the word understand. It does not do any good to provide alternate means of communication, alternate ways of representation, if the client or the consumer, or whatever word you use there, is not able to understand it in a format that is usable and accessible, okay? And this goes back to the idea of universal design, where we can create materials that are good for everybody, right? And we'll talk a little bit about those in a second, but I wanted to also mention that a good plan for communication with people who have IDD is will result in not having to have a third party involved. Okay, that's where you really get the crux of therapy, and that relationship that can build and benefit the client ultimately. And when you have a person, and we know it from accommodations in doctors' offices. Okay, so when we talk about the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA says, it is not a proper form of communication to have a third person talking to the doctor on your behalf about your health. Okay, and that's not even getting into HIPAA and all those other things. But sometimes the questions or the answers to very important questions are not answered properly because you have a third person that's involved. So a good plan, right, for communication will ultimately lead to a better result again. Okay, and we'll talk. And so a good example is written materials, right? So whether they're printed or electronic, okay, and allow the client to customize. Say, do you understand this? Can you read this? Is it large enough print? Is it, all those things? So, and written materials are super important because they're tangible, okay, right? They can take them home, they can use them again, and they can use them as reference. So any oral instruction should have written materials to supplement what's being said or what's being told. So we've all been to the doctor, like I said before, and given a list of instructions for what to do and not to do. And did you really understand that when you left? Okay. And sometimes what else happens too? You go to the doctor, you speak to a therapist or whatever, and then when you, and someone in the chat said, no acronyms. That is a great point. We need to put that in our presentation for the next time we do this. I mean, it is a great point. But you go to the doctor and then you leave and you go home and you think of 38 questions that you should have asked, right? So if you have something tangible on your, a list of instructions, those kinds of things to do, then that alleviates some of that pressure to remember everything that the person told you. So, all right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, use large, easy to read fonts. Okay, and this recommends sans serif. It's kind of cool. The history on sans serif dates back to when Romans used stone carvings, and additional serifs were added to help distinguish letters. So people tend to think serifs have a distinguished quality because of their traditional look. So current recommendations are to use sans serif in the body of the text. However, allowing the user, again, to customize the font is the best option. Okay, so what looks good to you? What's easiest for you? So you can avoid overly stylizing fonts. Like some of these are listed up here: Comic Sans, Papyrus, Viner, Kristen, Pearls, those kinds of things. Although they look great, okay, they can stifle communication in a lot of situations. So Underlined text should only indicate a link. All right, that's something that we're learning now, is that our minds are starting to think, if it's underlined, you can click on it and it goes somewhere. Okay, so do not use underline as an emphasis. Italics can hinder readability using sparingly on single words or short phrases. Font size should be at least 11 points, okay, if not larger. And again, know your audience. For example, if you're writing at a third grade level, right, then you need to know the audience and what is going to be the most effective for that audience.
So documents, again, we recommend between 11 to 14 point, depending on, again, what your audience is. And that lower reading level, we do recommend that you use a larger font. Presentations are a little bit different. Obviously, with a Zoom presentation, you can get away with a little bit smaller font, but if you're presenting in a big room, I know that in Louisville, Kentucky, there's a hotel that we present at, and often we are presenting on a very textured wall instead of a nice screen, and we really have to be we really have to use a lot of contrast with our backgrounds and our in the letters to make sure that it stands out. A second recommendation is to use bulleted lists. Long lists of items can be hard to read, and bullets help put that information into short, consumable statements. Bullets help to separate points and ideas, and they can also encourage further reading by embedding links. And always going back to the user and being able to customize their information. So for example, we were in a training once and we had a training manual printed in a 15-point font. And we ended up having an individual who needed it in a 24-point font. They had a visual impairment and required a 24-point font. And because we provided that information ahead of time, they were actually able to go back and customize that and print it out in the font that they needed. So generally, before I present to a group, I like to have all of my materials stored. I use Dropbox, but there are a lot of different websites that you can use to host content. And so the URL that Dropbox gives you is really long. So I use a URL shortener. I like Bitly, but there are a lot of other URL shorteners out there as well. These are both free with limited terms. So you copy the shared link, create that custom URL, and then it's really easy to share that information. And one of the reasons that I really like it is every time that I present on this topic, we always end up gathering new resources. We get great ideas from our audience, and I'm able to throw those ideas into the box and update that as we go. And it really becomes a really rich resource.
Patti, could I jump in and say something along those lines? I've noticed some people in the chat and the questions mentioning about asking preferences, and you're talking about customization. And I think it is really important just to follow up on Patti's point that, you know, with universal design, we're trying to think through things ahead of time, and what can we do ahead of time to make this environment and this session better for everyone. But also that doesn't mean that we don't ask for individual preferences. That's a complement to it. Someone asked about adapted tools like the DMID2. Yes, I mean, again, we're still individualizing. So we might decide an adaptive tool is the best thing to use. We might, think, hey, we're going to start with using 14 to 16 point font to begin with and hope that it serves more people, but then we're also going to have an electronic version so we can change this. So just always keeping in mind the ability to customize and individualize.
Yeah, and someone also mentioned in the chat that there's a font available just for people with dyslexia, and they said they're not. Says someone else said the dyslexia font is amazing, so we might be able to get that. If somebody could send us that information in chat, we'd be happy to disseminate it to all of you all.
Yes, and actually the MHDD website and several of the HDI websites actually use an accessibility tool. It's not it's an overlay, so it's not the only way you should make your website accessible, but during the Q&A at the end, we can actually talk about that UserWay accessibility app, and we'll be able to show it. And it actually has that dyslexic font built in. All right, information conveyed only through sound is not equally accessible to all clients. We know that because of the CAST principles. Written transcripts or closed captioning should be available for video and audio files. If playing an audio clip or giving information verbally, consider adjustments to volume and speed of the playback or speech. Additionally, clinicians should allow for pauses for silence, as some clients, such as those with autism, may need additional time to process and formulate responses to verbal information. A YouTube video allows for user control of captions and of the playback speed. A user can watch a video slower or faster. And on this slide, we can see the difference between captions and a transcript. The captions on the left run along the bottom of the video as the video is played. Closed captions are a user's choice to turn on or off. In the YouTube video player, we have a CC button. Open captions would always be available and are sometimes referred to as burned-in captions. A transcript is a single document with everything stated in a video or audio file. Sometimes the transcript will also include the video or audio timestamp. All right, so going along with captions, in YouTube, we have the ability to turn on what are called auto captions. And so YouTube has a program that will take the video and try and guess what is being said. And I will go ahead and say that this statement comes from the University of Kentucky's, they had a promotional video. And so the statement is, take advantage of exceptional birch unity with world-class backers. So in the chat, if you want to try and guess what was actually said. So this is a piece from the captions. It is not at all accurate of what is actually being said.
I'm sorry, Patty, I thought this was yours. Is this mine?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I was giving everyone a minute to respond. Okay,
I'm
so you
sorry,
got the
I'm sorry.
opportunity. All right, so it actually says, take advantage of exceptional research opportunities with world-class faculty. So you can see the difference between the two. Really problematic when you rely on things like auto captioning. So we're going to estimate that only 50-ish% of the words were actually correct in this one statement. And so if you are using auto captions, I would highly recommend that you go back and you correct those captions. There are services that can correct the captions for you that you can pay for, or it is really easy to do on your own. All right, moving on to visual representations, such as videos or photos. You should always supplement with verbal descriptions, captions, or written descriptions of the content of images. So some clients might benefit from receiving visual information like charts, graphics, written text, in addition to auditory stimuli. For example, a clinician might consider color coding details on a chart for a client while also speaking the information out loud. Visual supports increase accessibility to everyone. Visual supports prompt individuals to help to stay focused on tasks, to manage their time, and offer reminders of upcoming transitions. Because of their variety and availability, it is often a simple task to incorporate visuals that are inviting and attractive. This assists in their effectiveness. Visuals can be easy to implement, and images are often easy to remember.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, Patty, that we see this a lot outside of the world of just people with disabilities, and that as we're doing these presentations and stuff more and more with PowerPoint and other things, using visuals like that greatly enhances sort of our message and allows people to understand it at a greater rate. And I think that goes back to what we talked about before, that it's very important to consider the client in making the decisions on. Usually through conversation, you can kind of figure out sort of some of what the triggers are for somebody to help them understand in a learning environment, such as a therapy session. So using visuals is very important. And once you talk to the client and understand that it's something that's helpful for them.
Right. So here's an example of a chart you might create for a client. The directions are written plainly. The bullets help to organize the steps, and then the visuals reinforce. And these visuals actually come from a website called emojipedia.org, which is an emoji encyclopedia. So you can actually pick up all of the emojis that are available, and you can embed them in websites, Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, wherever you can type, you are able to embed an emoji. And so that is actually one of the links that is available in that UD therapy box link. So, and you can actually type it into, you can use them in Zoom chats as well, I have found. And actually it will have the history of some of those emojis too, which is kind of cool. All right, last we're going to talk about embedding captions and alt text. So alt text gives the context for the image, and this is important for individuals using assistive technology like screen readers. And so when an image, when the screen reader comes to an image, that alt text is picked up, and then that context is given to the person using the assistive technology. But also it can be good for people like, I know that sometimes when my kids and I are all on Zoom together, my internet is just really slow and lags. Sometimes Facebook, the social media images don't come up, and it's really nice to have those alt texts for me just when I have that really bad internet connection. And finally, on websites and then also on social media, alt text actually increases your searchability score in search engines. And so that's another key reason why you should be using alt text.
So I don't know if you remember these puzzles. They're called rebus puzzles. And I used to love these puzzles as a kid. Does anyone know what this puzzle, what this means? This image on screen? Yes, someone was so fast. People are so fast here. Split pea soup, right? Because it's the word soup with the pea cracked open in the middle. So, I always want to say, we should keep in mind not talking in acronyms, as someone mentioned, and not talking in symbols and ways, we do it so we're not even thinking about it. Actually, Jason, I heard you say earlier, OVR, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, right? Because that's in your everyday vocabulary. I probably said already on here some acronyms and no one knew what I was talking about. And, and the therapeutic world, or CBT, DBT, DMID2, EMDR, sometimes these things just fly out of our mouth and we forget. So just on the next slide, we're going to talk more about this, but how can we state things in a way that is easy for our client to understand and consume that information and speak more plainly. So we'll talk more here.
So obviously, if we ask you all this question and you respond, you would get a lot of these things. To ensure therapeutic communication is understood, not just a single client, but a wide variety of clients, it's important to use clear, concrete language, right? Avoid jargon, right, as Elaine was alluding to. Metaphors, clarify vocabulary and symbols, and take extra time to explain concepts and terms as needed, okay? Social workers can consider providing clients with a glossary or a dictionary of common terms and concepts, which may be helpful. This can include things like charts and images, other kind of visuals, as we talked about a few slides ago, along with explanations of what those mean, all right? And again, we can always use this as a reference point, and the client can use it as a reference point, and provide professional interpreters or provide written materials in client's chosen language. I think that comes from I'm going to try this, National Association of Social Workers, right? The Standards and Indicators for Cultural Competence in Social Work Practice, which I think is from 2015. And it directed all social workers to strive to provide written materials in the language chosen by the person. And that would include professional interpreters when needed. Okay.
And you don't have to start from scratch with the glossary or dictionary. There are some out there. So if you just Google like mental health therapy, glossary dictionary, you can find some that can help you start yours.
And we have lots of recommendations in that folder. There are several documents that can help walk you through writing in plain language. For me, it's a way to make sure that all my audience can understand the information I'm providing. Generally for professionals, we try to write around a 9th grade level. And if the intended audience is going to be family members, we try to stick around a 5th grade level. So Elaine had mentioned at the beginning of the session that the modules that we developed are available online. They were written around a 9th to 10th grade level. And we really worked hard on making them plain language. And when we first piloted the modules, the feedback that we got back from everyone, no matter what their role was how easy that the modules were to understand. And that really goes back to all that work that we did to make them plain language.
So as you know, during therapy, clients are taking in a lot of information in order to build their skills. And so one of the things that people need for comprehension is background knowledge. And sometimes our clients don't have that. And not only do we need to provide it, we need some ways to kind of remind them of the background knowledge and help them connect the dots. So of course, it's very important to supply any background information, and that starts from the very first session. And you already do this, but explaining intake, explaining what therapy is, explaining what will happen in therapy, ideas and concepts like informed consent, and leaving lots of times for questions. This is something that we always need to be doing for every client. We probably are doing anyway, but just as a reminder, we can go to the next slide. And again, for comprehension, we already do and can employ various strategies to support people, like graphic organizers, flowcharts, tables, concept maps can all help clients, link new ideas to previous knowledge. So that's one way we can help people process and comprehend. We can also present information in blocks of related concepts and give information in a sequence order. And this also helps retain for clients to retain information. So we just finished multiple means of representation, and the last concept we'll talk about briefly here, but we talked about information about written materials, electronic documents, audio-visual, simplifying, explaining, language of choice, increasing comprehension. So while we move to the next and the last piece, if you want to just write in what you do to use multiple means of representation in the chat as we're talking, and then we can give our fellow participants some more ideas. So multiple means of action and expression is our last piece here. And of course, all of our clients have different preferred methods for communication. Some express themselves best in written language, some prefer verbal speech, others use technology. A coworker of mine who prefers to express herself through written gave me the idea that maybe she and I can talk on Zoom, because she knew that I prefer to express myself through talking. And through Zoom, I could talk and she can write back on chat. So it gives us both that opportunity. So when we're thinking about this, the Universal Design for Learning guidelines from CAST talk about 3 things for providing multiple means of action and expression. That's physical action, expression and communication, and executive function. So with executive function is an important piece of therapy, and we pretty much need to support all of our clients with executive function. High-level executive function is something that's difficult for all of us, and that's what's used to set long-term goals and develop strategies and stick to those strategies to meet goals, right? So we can always support our clients with goal setting by providing templates and examples, thinking through realistic strategies and goals. We can help the clients essentially, and we do, identify the why, how, when, and who of their goals, with who. We can perform check-ins, as we already talked about, encourage people to check in with others, utilize an app for accountability. We can also provide tools such as checklists, things to record verbal notes, apps, and visual representations of progress, such as pictures or charts that people can use as a way to help them.
All right, and then next in We know that all mental health clinicians supply certain materials requiring client interaction. For example, you might utilize workbooks, journals, or calendars and charts to be filled in by the client. Some of these may require physical abilities, dexterity, and motor demands that not all clients possess. Having interactive materials available in a variety of formats, like a hard copy, large print, and electronic, allows clients the opportunity to select a version that is easiest for them to interact with physically. For some clients, keyboards, headphones, or voice control methods may be the best option for their interaction with materials. Social workers should also be prepared to allow clients to interact in their preferred way. Some clients will use methods of communication other than speaking. Some clients may use assistive technology to communicate. Other clients may simply prefer to communicate through written or typed words rather than verbally. And I think that Elaine gave that great example of our coworker.
So some of these strategies include things like art, right? That's an expressive mode. That could be music, drama, dance, any type of art. Social media, manipulatives. There are many different ways for people to express themselves. One option, of course, is also journaling. Journaling has been studied extensively as a therapeutic tool, as a way for the therapist and client to communicate in a different way. This doesn't have to be a traditional pen and paper. This can be electronic, it can be paper. If it's electronic, it could also include, speech to text software and apps. And you can integrate things in your journal like images, sound, tactile materials. So we can think outside the box of what this might mean for our clients who want to participate in that way. Other things to consider might be things like role playing or virtual reality. So therapeutic role playing has been really valuable for some clients in addressing and combating specific phobias, but this can be used for any client that might prefer this. Another idea would be virtual reality. That's been most often used as a mode of administering exposure therapy, but again, it can have other therapeutic uses, and we can think about all of these ways that clients can interact. And of course, we're asking our clients what they prefer as well. So under multiple means of action and expression, we talked about increasing executive function with some strategies, physical action, and different methods for communication. So if you would, and in the chat while we're on our last slide, go ahead and share any ways that you support your clients in providing multiple means for them to act and express. I see someone said Uno. I like Uno. I'd be curious to know how you use it. Apps, coloring books, drawing, journals, Zoom chat, iPads, journaling. Emoji Uno is awesome. Okay, that sounds like something good to try. So right now, since we're at the very end, and Jason and Patty and I are happy to stay longer, but that ends our presentation on Universal Design for Learning Framework and Clinical Practice. And we wanted to know if there are any remaining questions you have, and we're happy to stick around and talk with you a little bit more.
I'm just going to jump in here and say thanks everybody for coming. And what we did when we sent the emails out was we said we'd have an optional 30-minute Q&A. So our panelists are going to stay on here for up to 30 minutes. I know some people need to go, but we invite you to stay on, ask questions, have conversations. If you let us know in the chat or in the Q&A, we can ask questions for you, or we can unmute you and you can ask yourself.
And Kristen, if you could just help us out if you saw any questions go by that.
There is so much going on in the chat. I'm just going to ask you to put things in the Q&A if you're asking a question, or raise your hand and we can let you talk. I cannot keep up with the chat. So if we all look in there, maybe we can dig some stuff out. Like I see ditto on substance abuse question, but I'm not getting back to the question, but I'm looking. Okay, so in the Q&A, have you ever provided support for people who are nonverbal?
Sure, and that's important. And you know, one of the tools, of course, that many people who are non-speaking may be using is any type of assistive technology, whether that's an iPad, computer. And so, I mean, the main thing is at the intake process to find out how are they communicating. And like Jason mentioned, you know, it is ideal to have privacy. It is ideal to not have to use a third party. So any way that you can do that through assistive technology would be my first suggestion. And Jason, do you have more thoughts on that?
Well, one thing that I should have mentioned before, the thing that I do like about the idea of assistive technology in these situations is that it's cheaper than it's ever been before. There's so much more, a wide array of apps and those kinds of things, but specifically in the communication form, I mean, I think it still goes back to the idea of what works best for the client and asking that question up front. And in that situation, you're probably asking the support system, you know, how do you communicate for things like, you know, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need, you know, this, I need that, whatever, and try to integrate that into the therapy situation. I mean, I think that's a, well, yeah, kind of answer. But as far as always assistive technology is great to use, and it's more accessible than it's ever been. Accessible financially, I think, is the best way to put it. Whereas some of the communication devices we used 20 years ago would cost 10 grand. You can buy an iPad with an app, you know, it works really well for under $1,000. And they're great investments, I think, in the for therapists in a therapy setting, so they don't put the burden on the client. So I don't know if that helped a lot, Elaine, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great.
Okay, so there are several things around substance abuse and alcoholism with intellectual and developmental disability treatments. So just looking for general information.
And you know, we have a module that's going to come out one day on that. And I can't, off the top of my head, and I don't know if you can remember, Kristen, from the module, there was like one evidence-based program in this area, but unfortunately, there's very little information and research in the area of substance abuse treatment with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so off the top of my head, I can't remember that name of that program, but I don't have a lot to share here, unfortunately. And I know we need more resources in this area.
What support is there for helping people deal with trauma?
So I'm not a trauma expert myself, but I can say that when we've worked with other clinicians who are experts in this area, one of their pieces of advice was to, and maybe you're not supposed to say this out loud, but to assume trauma, because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities do experience much greater rates of trauma. They experience greater rates of violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse. They also experience isolation, a trauma in the sense of bullying, and also medical trauma, and we do have some. Is our module up on trauma, Kristen?
It is not, but it can give some resources and share some resources in box.
We can share some more. Looks like someone's. We can share some more resources from box that we have for you on trauma, and but assuming trauma throughout therapy, even if someone's not sharing it, has been one way that we have heard from another clinician who specializes in this area, that they approach any therapy with a client with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we will pull out some resources to share with you on trauma in this population.
What supports do you have or know of for visually impaired?
Patti or Jason, do you want to talk about that at all?
Patty might be a better resource than me, but I mean, there's obviously there's screen readers out there, there's voice to text, there's text to voice, those kinds of things are what we would tend to use in those situations.
And talk to the client, ask them how you can better support them. You know, we recognize that universal design, we try to make the most accessible environment for a person, but obviously individual modifications may need to be made depending on the disability or the person.
Right, and I know we talked about this recently on another webinar, but you know, we've been using Zoom for everything, but you know, we could ask the client, do they just want to use a phone? I mean, they want to use a phone, and providing electronic documents and using accessibility checkers to ensure that it could be screen read and compatible with a screen reader. And then going back and asking your client to make sure that it worked if you're providing any information that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you made, because we have this own battle in our house sometimes where one of us is texting someone for 45 minutes, and the conversation that would take 2 if we were just talking to them. And if that option is available, you can cut through a lot of in text you can understand things like tone, context is sort of skewed at times, so it's not a bad idea for definitely to ask the client, say, would you just like to talk by phone once a week, and that may eliminate some of the clutter.
Let's see. What about people who are not language oriented? How do you use pre-language skills to communicate or teach with people who cannot relate to assistive communication devices? Of course, we might have some people on here who have really good answers to some of these questions too, if there are other people that want to speak or put things in chat.
I guess I'm a little bit struggling with how to answer to this, because I'm trying to think about people who aren't language oriented, and maybe I'm not understanding the question exactly, because I think most people are language oriented. Maybe do you mean that they're not expressing themselves through language or assistive technology? I'm not sure if that's what you mean. I mean, thinking through some of the other ways that people can express themselves, whether it's role playing. I don't know if virtual reality therapy or some sort of online games would work if you're talking about that. I'm not sure what clients you have in mind, but role playing, manipulatives, images, drawing, music, dance, any other ways that you can think of, I would suggest, but I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood your question exactly.
Is my screen, can you see the Project Core website on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a place where you might get started. So core boards are a great place for people with that may have those pre-emerging literacy skills. And so they'll actually be able to kind of walk you through developing a core board, which is what a lot of the schools use. And so it's a physical board where you might have action statements. There might be, the different therapies that you have available, different games, and then they're able to make those indications to you.
And one thing, and I apologize if I'm not answering this correctly for you, but one thing on there that popped up for me is the eye gaze technology. And so that people who are not able to physically move to touch things or speak may use eye gaze technology. And Jason, I don't know if you know if there's any places to access technology like that, eye gaze technology.
Yeah, there's tons of resources out there. I would start with the CATS Center, CATS Center, which is the local CATS network provider. HDI runs that program where they have the website is AT4, the number 4, at4all.org. And on that website, there's a lot of, the cool thing is they operate a lending library. And so people can try it before they buy it, that kind of stuff. They can try several different things. But the eye gaze technology is there. And they have it available there, and it's available at a lot of places. That technology has gotten a lot better in the years. But it can be accessed to the CATS network. Again, go ahead.
I was going to say, as Cheryl mentioned in the chat, every state has these federally funded state assistive technology programs. And you can Google that for your state, and they should all have lending libraries for assistive technology so that you can try any of these before you buy it. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that AT for All should give you all state programs you can select by state.
And Courtney mentioned social stories, which is another great resource for people who are nonverbal.
Okay, there's a question about self-awareness and ways of increasing self-awareness if you have ideas around it.
I don't have anything specifically that comes to mind for a strategy. Do any of y'all or Kristen?
I think social stories is really good for social awareness too. I know we keep coming back to social stories, but they pretty much work with every population of individuals and are really good for increasing self-awareness.
Okay.
There are some apps now that are specifically geared towards social awareness now. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you did a search, there are some apps specifically geared towards increasing.
Just wanted to point out too, that if you're monitoring the chat, everybody, there's a ton of resources going up from you all to share with everybody else. So that's a good, you want to pop open that a chat window and look through some of this stuff. Almost every question that we've been asked is being addressed by one of you all, which I really appreciate. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff in there. And someone mentions Karen Harvey, and she has a book coming out next year around trauma and intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I know several people have asked about that. And she has a resource out, and she has a new one coming out.
And our first webinar for the Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center was actually with Karen Harvey, and that is archived on our website. And it was fabulous.
Yeah, she's great. I think NAD has her books for sale and has the new one that you can pre-order. Anything else? If you guys look through here and help me if I'm missing anything, or if anyone has anything else. There's still several things, but a lot of them are, questions about getting the follow-up email. You will get a follow-up email. Then we'll have an evaluation and a quiz. So fill out the evaluation. If you want continuing education credits, please complete the quiz, and then you will get the certificate via email. And that will come by the end of the week.
Sorry. I did see someone asking about what resources are out there. So on our website, mhdcenter.is it org or com? Oh, there it is, org. Sorry, I had a momentary blank. .org. That's up on the screen, or I guess we're not sharing anymore. mhdcenter.org. We have some resources. Like Patti mentioned, we have our webinars, all of our webinars archived there for you to look at. We have fact sheets, we have modules, but we also link out to some other providers of resources. NAD, of course, NADD is a organization that I would certainly look to for resources. And then we try to link out to other folks who have good resources on our website.
There is a question about keeping universal design at the forefront while assessing the needs of everyone. And I would always recommend that your board, that any committees always include people with disabilities, because you have to be receiving that input. And it shouldn't be, for instance, our new student center at our university, when it was developed and designed, there was input received by different community groups. And so just those are things that you can make sure that those needs are being addressed.
We have several requests for the copy of the chat transcript. It does not come. Patty's dog is getting my dog excited. So what I'll do is kind of go through the chat and make a summary of it and share that with our resources. Okay, we have lots of requests for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ideas that people put into the chat. So it'd be wonderful if we could archive that for folks.
Please send the whole content. Well, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background about like TA help and questions. I'm not going to take anything out that's significant, but there's a bunch of stuff that'll be like, hey, how do I get to, you know, there's just a lot of other questions that get sent privately to us. So we'll include what you're asking for the whole content, just not the TA questions.
There's a question that says, what about hiring and training parents who are experienced with IDD to be assistants? I would like to know what you mean by that, Jeannie. Are you talking about hiring them that have experienced it before for new clients, or hiring them to be assistants for their own children?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because, you know, obviously in the therapeutic context, you know, you're only people who are licensed to practice can provide these services, but I think probably you had something else in mind, Jenny. So if you want to put it in the chat or anything, we'd love to try to answer your question.
Because I just to break that off just a little bit, I think that kind of goes back to what Patty said a minute ago before, is that would be a great asset if you're having like a decision-making board or an advisory council, those kinds of things. That'd be a great person to include in that aspect of it. But as far as direct services, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think it could definitely be beneficial, but definitely outside of the parent-child relationship, especially in a therapy setting. Someone also said, what about the deaf and deaf-blind individuals? Patty, do you have any readily available resources for the deaf and deaf-blind individuals?
I don't, other than, you know, asking those individuals what their preferences are, and obviously making sure that your materials are accessible to screen readers. I know that in the chat earlier, someone had said it would be helpful to kind of understand how the screen reader access their materials, and certainly YouTube has a lot of examples.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zoom text is one. JAWS is probably the most popular of all of the screen reader accessibility, and it's JAWS just like the shark. And you can find examples of that on YouTube. You can look for video examples.
I think this is a great question, Elaine. You may want to take this, but it says, any recommendations for working with a high school client with autism that will converse with his peers during our class group exercises, but not respond to me? Interesting.
Jason, did you want to answer it, or?
I don't know that I know the answer. I guess it depends on the relationship we're wanting to create there, but because you really can't, I mean, I would think more of a group session would work in that situation, but it depends on what you're trying to get to as a result. Because you wouldn't want you wouldn't want a third party involved if there was some more intimate conversation going on, a personal conversation. But it may be a good idea in that situation to include them in the discussion, in a lighter discussion about something else. It kind of helps draw them out to where, you know, you can kind of earn their trust in some way, and then, you know, sort of bridge that into a more developed relationship where they might open up. And obviously, I would think, Brandy, you've probably tried this already, as you all tend to be the experts in what you're trying to do. But maybe just kind of foster a longer or a larger group, I'm sorry, of people, and just sort of try to narrow it down.
And maybe, and I don't, obviously, like Jason said, Brandy, I'm sure you've already tried a number of different strategies, but I wonder if one-on-one conversations, the person feels more comfortable with written or some other mode, then they feel differently in a group. So it might be something to explore.
I mean, for me, when I was in high school, when it came down to, you know, I don't want to act like I like the teacher and look uncool in front of all my friends. So maybe that's it. I don't know. Not that you're not cool, Brandy. I'm sure you're cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking back on trauma too, and thinking about, you know, and there may be a reason that's trauma related, that the person has uncomfortable interacting with people of a certain gender, or teachers that there's been a bad experience in the past. So just being sensitive to that and providing some time, like Jason mentioned.
That's a good Brandy responded with laugh out loud. I'm not cool. That's the best answer I've heard today. That's great.
Hi, this is Lisa in Mississippi. If I could just say something about the deaf blindness piece. I noticed that Melanie spoke about interveners, and the difference between an intervener and an interpreter is that an interpreter is pure. They're going to just translate. They're a pipeline, a conduit for what you are trying to say. An intervener is part teacher, part interpreter, part therapist, part everything. They tend to be more in the schools, but they are available other places. They started in Canada and they're spreading here in the United States. So if you've got somebody with deaf blindness, if you could reach out to the Helen Keller Center, and they could give you the name of the Regional Technical Assistance Program, and they would help you find an intervener and somebody perhaps that would do tactile in sign language, which is a whole other thing. And it would need to be somebody who would just not be that conduit, but would actually be part of the team to help the understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Like we said, you guys we always have the experts in the audience, so we appreciate your input. Okay, anything else? We have a few minutes left. We've addressed a lot of questions. I apologize if we missed some. Okay, thank you, Patti. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Elaine, for being here. Thanks everybody for joining us. We hope you will join us in future webinars, and a lot of the stuff we've addressed today, any had questions about, have been addressed in webinars in the past. So check out the website and see if you can find a resource that helps you there, and we will follow up with other resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, you all.